Hello, and welcome to SPE Live. My name is Trey Shaffer, and I'm a senior partner at ERM. I'm moderating this session as part of my role on the SPE Business Management and Leadership Committee. Now, for all of us, the past 2 years have been really stressful, and it's caused a challenge for all of us and those we work with every day. What we all thought was steady state just 2 years ago has been significantly altered. To address this challenge, we're delighted to bring you today's SPE Live on the topic of resilience in the workplace, how to thrive in changing conditions. As always, please share your questions and comments in the chat boxes on LinkedIn. We're going to try to get to a few questions toward the end of our session today, and you can expect hopefully about 5 minutes worth of questions at the end. To help me discuss this topic, I'm delighted to introduce two esteemed guests who will be joining me in the virtual studio today. First is Susie Hill. Susie's the Global Health Promotion Manager at Shell, and she's led health improvement programs since 1994. Her current focus is on the development and delivery of Shell's global mental health strategy. Susie holds a master's degree in health and social marketing and has co-authored a book on this subject. She's got a professional interest in psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral economics, and is passionate about collaborating on projects which help people to be their best. When I was looking for some speakers today, I asked people who we should identify, and multiple people came back with Susie, so she's well known in the industry. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Allison Drury. Alison is a senior partner with ERM based in San Francisco, California. She's ERM's regional client market leader for the technology sector. Allison's part of a global leadership team at ERM that it was tasked by our CEO to reimagine the future of work at ERM. She has a master's degree in urban planning from New York University and a bachelor's degree in political science from Queen's University. Hi, Susie and Alison. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi there.
Hi, Trey. Thanks.
I'm looking forward to this. We've had a lot of really energetic discussions in preparation for our meeting today. And really to set the stage, recognizing that many of us have faced serious personal challenges, and we've also had a major disruption in the oil and gas sector. I'd like to get your perspective on how we reimagine our routines and the way we interact with each other to, as Susie put it, resist the shock and improve our performance and achieve success. So I'd like to start with Susie to see if you can react to that question, and then Alison to follow with your reflections.
Thanks, Trey. Well, I think I'd like to start by mentioning three rather old-fashioned words. That would be kindness, compassion, and care. Now, why do I mention those things? There are two key reasons why. Firstly, it's important that we demonstrate care, compassion, and kindness to ourselves, but also to others. And the reasons behind that, as we've all discovered, are many. But for me, firstly, in relation to the pandemic, we've all brought our own neurodiversity to this pandemic. None of us have experienced it in the same way. Some of us will have been lonely. Some of us will have been trapped in, anxious, depressed. Some of us are grieving. Some of us are actually getting over having COVID itself and all that brings. So every day when we come to work, we all bring a lot with us. And being kind to ourselves and accepting that all of this that we bring has an impact on our ability to actually function in what we might have regarded as normal is really important. And to remember that everybody else is showing up with a lot, and people are not necessarily telling you about it at the start of the day. So demonstrating that care, compassion, and kindness, and expecting to do so in all our interactions is absolutely critical. I think there's one other point I'd just like to raise right at the start here is, we've all been exposed to an enormous amount of uncertainty. And that uncertainty for folk working in oil and gas is going to continue as we go through a transition with energy. And as human beings, we find uncertainty incredibly difficult to cope with. Our brains actually see uncertainty as dangerous. So you may have heard of something called amygdala hijack. If you haven't, just really briefly, we have a part of our brains which is almost like an emergency button. And when we perceive uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity, that amygdala, that part of our brain that is the emergency button, starts to reduce our functioning in our prefrontal cortex. Our prefrontal cortex is an amazing part of our brain. It's involved in problem solving, creativity, executive function, socialization. You know, if I was to spend all of this webinar listing the functions of our prefrontal cortex, I'd probably spend all of it talking about that, but I can't. So just to let you know, when we are in this uncertainty, our brain doesn't do what it normally does, you know, and that was designed way back in prehistory, you know, when there's a rustle in the bushes. Either it was our lunch or we were about to become lunch. So we were wired to shut down and fight or flee when we saw this uncertainty. So that was all back then, and it was easily resolved. You either got eaten or you ate. Now we're left with ongoing uncertainty, and that leads our ability to do things that we would in a normal way to be reduced. And so taking it back to the kindness, there's a neurological reason why we need to be demonstrating self-care and care for others in this time and going forward. And if we can base all our actions and reactions on that, then we are all best placed to deal with the challenges of our future.
Thank you, Susie. What are your thoughts, Allison?
Sure. You know, I like to think about this, you know, the resist the shock and improve our performance in terms of human capital. And there are definitions, they abound, but it's essentially how you treat your people. And in this context, it means the health, the safety, the wellness, and the ability to perform in our work environments, which, you know, dramatically has shifted during the pandemic. The way we work now has pretty much fast forwarded us into this future. It impacts the way we deliver, communicate, and collaborate. And this is frankly a very new paradigm for all of our businesses. The ideal is, you know, to move forward post-pandemic to a better way to work, to be more productive, to attract and engage talent, also known as our human capital. And I would say, coupled with this, the focus on human capital management of our people is increasing with investors and other stakeholders. There's now even disclosure guidance from the SEC. SASB's outlined their approach to measuring and managing and disclosing. And major investors like BlackRock have also outlined risks that need to be disclosed. So it's very much caught the attention in part during the pandemic, but I think this was already starting to become an issue. And so I think now as we move forward, it's going to be a brave new world. We're all kind of in this grand experiment, experiencing this in real time.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Susie. We appreciate your thoughts. You know, it occurs to me that, you know, team, and we all thrive when we work in teams. We all work in teams. How are we going to create team in this new environment? I'd like to start with Allison on that one.
Sure. So Trey, as Trey mentioned, I worked on a future of work project within ERM. And one of the things we talked about was creating new rituals in this new virtual remote working situation. So as part of that, I established some new norms for my own team. We have a 15-minute virtual huddle every Monday. And we talk about things we never used to talk about. We talk about how we're feeling for the week. What we were proud of accomplishing the week prior, what we hope to do this week, what we need help on, as well as my favorite part, which is a shout out to someone who went above and beyond. And then we follow up with that individual to let them know. And, you know, I asked my team a few months into this if they still wanted to do this huddle, and they unanimously said yes. So, you know, I think we've in certain ways boosted employee engagement in a really interesting way using these technologies and tools. And you can see the engagement as people, you know, have more control over their schedules and live more authentically. You know, you have kids and pets popping up on Zoom. I hear stories of people working out instead of commuting, using that time in a different way. And it's been great to see and experience those facets of your colleagues and clients as well.
Thanks, Allison. Susie, what are your reflections on creating team in our new environment?
Well, it's interesting to hear what Alison's just said, because I work in a global team, and we did actually struggle a little with keeping connected, but we introduced a check-in, check-out system, which is a little bit like the team meetings Alison's talking about. We have one at the beginning of the day when we say good evening to our folk in Asia Pacific who are on our team, and the folk in my team who are right in the middle in Europe, we then say good evening and check out with the people in the US who are waking up the other end of the day. And that's worked really nicely. I think it's really important in times of uncertainty, again, to remember how we respond. We're designed to really work as in groups and teams, and most people prefer that. The problem comes really when we are not thinking about inclusion. So being inclusive is really important, because if you're not actively including folk, you are by default probably excluding them. And the impact of exclusion in times of uncertainty can be really, really difficult to cope with. People feel exclusion in the same way as they do physical pain. It actually causes an enormous psychological impact. So, these small rituals that Alison is talking about not only do us good in terms of finding common ground, being authentic, feeling psychologically safe to talk about what's on our minds, but they also give us the capability to work in an environment where we are kind of our neurological wiring is at its best, so to speak. We're able to perform at our best. So what feels right is also the right thing to do.
Thanks, Susie. Listening to you speak, and Allison, it's starting to, occur to me that really one of the underpinnings of this is culture. And I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about how the context of our new, let's say, normal, as we're starting to say, has impacted culture, and what we have to do to maintain culture, to develop culture, maybe even reflect on why culture is so important. So maybe, Susie, you could just continue on with a few reflections, and we'll follow on with Allison.
Yeah. Gosh, culture seems such a big thing, and to a lot of people, it means so much because it's what we're immersed in. But at the same time, it can be really hard to pin it down to what that actually means. And in Shell, I've watched some of our good leaders who've worked on culture. They've had the most success by breaking culture down into small chunks of behavior. So demonstrating intention through behavior. And they've actually looked at how they can measure and support that behavior. So watching the change as it goes. So Alison talked about the kind of microculture in teams and rituals, but on a larger scale, we need to take a really holistic view of our culture and start thinking about the things that start to help us create a culture that's supportive of good mental health and well-being. So things like our job demands, our role and how that is designed, the control we have over the work that we do, our relationships, the support that we get, and how change is managed in an organization. So in Shell, we're looking at Shell Health at the moment, we're looking at some of those factors which are included in the new ISO, and those ones that I just mentioned are part of the UK Health and Safety Executive, 6 factors relating to stress. So if you want to go have a look at those, do. They are very important factors in developing an organisation that supports and a culture that supports good mental health and well-being.
Yeah, I agree, Susie. I think, when we look at establishing new norms in our working behaviors and the management practices, that really sets up our people for success. And, here at ERM, our culture is very entrepreneurial in nature, and I would say technologically adept. And culturally, we have a strong sense of purpose. And what we try to do is maximize that potential in our talent and the value that we bring to our clients. And this whole brave new world, this, new normal, working virtually, it's almost a natural extension of our global strategy, right? And to a certain extent, it was already occurring before the COVID pandemic. By necessity, we all tend to work globally. And I think it's really shaped the organizational culture as well, just because of the way we were already contemplating the evolution of our business and of how we interact with not just one another, but with our clients as well.
Thanks, Allison and Susie. I'm thinking about this and just my own experience, and I think all of us have experienced some of this. It feels that, especially if you have high engagement with others, or let's say high people contact with your role, that you're possibly facing things like information overload. Things are becoming more complex. They're taking longer to get done, and you're finding yourself just really, in some sense, sometimes overwhelmed by the massive amount of contacts and the details that you have to manage in an environment where you can't bump into somebody at the coffee pot, or just have that 30-second conversation while you're walking beside each other in the halls. And now it's a 15-minute scheduling something and trying to figure out how you can connect with someone. So all of these things are creating some stresses. And I want to build on what Alison was describing about organizational culture, and really see if we can get at some of the things we might do as individuals to help to shape that organizational culture even more. How do we show up as leaders? What's necessary for us to be able to be effective in shaping that culture? So maybe Susie, I'll pass it over to you and follow up with some additional reflections by Alison.
So, there's a multitude of things we can do as leaders, but I think how we show up, there's two really important key ones for me. Firstly, it's about knowing our teams well. I said finding common ground earlier, but the importance of that is really just as critical. If we know our teams as individuals, our natural teams as individuals, we can tell how people are in their normal state, whatever normal is now. But it's so much more important now. We have to do business via camera. Yeah, it's important to know one another, so that if we see a shift, we can, in our team as a whole, but also as individuals, we can ask how people are and really find out what that's about. So I think that's absolutely critical. The other thing really, and it all links in together, is this sense of psychological safety. So as a leader, if you can talk and share your dilemmas, your challenges, if you can say when you don't know, but you're going to find out, if you can explain some of the things you've had to go through in coming to a decision. Transparency, communication, authenticity, these are all absolutely critical to create a safe space where we can all show up and be our authentic selves, where we can learn from our mistakes, and where we can just, it's that sense of being safe to speak your mind. So it also impacts on our safety. If there's something we see and we can put our hands up and say so, that's really critical. So for me, it's about that psychological safety, and also linking into that, finding common ground. And it is about those small rituals that Alison talked about. We shouldn't underestimate those things. We use big language to describe small rituals and behaviors, and those small rituals and behaviors make the big difference.
Thanks, Susie. And I'm just thinking about your thoughts on psychological safety. And when you're establishing that kind of environment or that culture, it really enables your team to learn. And when your team can learn, it's really enhancing its performance. It's kind of supercharging it, because you're sort of creating momentum and you're building on your inertia. So, Allison, do you have any thoughts on this?
I do. And, yes, psychological safety, core piece of it. The other thing we've looked at and thought about is the cognitive diversity, right? Bringing different people with different backgrounds and ideas together. There's been lots of research on this. Teams solve problems faster when they're more cognitively diverse. And it's not demographic diversity necessarily, though that can be part of it, but just looking for that valuable input created by all these different backgrounds and information and where people are coming from. That's very helpful. The information overload is real. So here at ERM, we've been leveraging our own learning and development teams to kind of test outputs on smaller working groups before launching those new rituals, those new management practices to the wider organization. One of my technology clients has a really great perspective on, what to do, right? And so they have this kind of concept where they go with what should we stop doing? What should we continue to do? And what should we start doing? And I like that kind of constant feedback loop with those questions to try and process all that information as we kind of make our way through the day.
Thanks, Allison. We have one more sort of topic we want to cover, and it's kind of a reflection on the quote unquote big lesson that we may have learned. I'd like to have each of you share a thought on what a big lesson is that the audience can take away. And then we do have a question. And so I encourage the audience to continue to pop those questions in. We'll probably be able to get to one or two. So I'll leave that question on the big lesson. Let's start with Susie, please.
Oh, I think we've learned so much in this pandemic. But if I had to choose one thing, Trey, I think it would be when we've been faced with so much uncertainty that we can't plan ahead, what we've had to do is learn to be in the present. And there are many people who would say that is something that will do our mental health an enormous amount of good. So one of the things that went down extremely well in Shell when we were all in a real turmoil, we really couldn't think very far ahead, was the story of Admiral Stockdale, who was incarcerated in the Hanoi Hilton in the Vietnam War. And he experienced torture and so much uncertainty about his life and the life of all his troops with him. And when asked what helped him get through and why he survived and others didn't, he basically said that he was able to stay rooted in the seriousness of the situation, but he didn't pin his hopes on things he had no control over. And he said the people who pinned their hopes on getting out at Christmas very sadly didn't make it. And this is this diversity of being able to stay rooted in the present and the seriousness of the situation, but having an unwavering faith and hope that we will get through is something that I think we've learned. And that's very important for us in our personal lives, and it's very important for us going into this energy transition that we're all going to go through.
Susie, I love that story. I think, the other thing I would say we've, like you said, we've learned a lot of things during the pandemic. I do think the sense of community and resilience in this space of adversity has really proved, collectively our adaptability, our inherent flexibility and, resilience. And it's somewhat at odds with, the traditional change management theory. But these new norms of working, it's not going to be without challenge. Same with managing productivity, community, and connectedness, all of those scenarios. But we've come through it somewhat. We're still in the pandemic, but there's a future there. And it will be interesting to see how we go back, right? Because the world has fundamentally changed and the way we interact with people has changed, and the stakeholder involvement has changed. But it's also very exciting too. This was a big test for the world, for our respective businesses. And I think the way that we now interact with people all around the world in various scenarios has fundamentally changed, but for the better. I would say, kind of wrapping that up. Trey, back to you.
Thank you. And I want to thank the audience for offering some questions. My esteemed SPE colleagues who are helping us manage this event are going to put one on the screen. And we'd like to ask our panelists, what are your thoughts related to agility? What are the attributes that can create that sense of adaptability and need to change? What do we need to have as individuals? So I'll start with Susie.
Well, I always think about this as in relation to how we perceive change. And I think it goes back to what I said earlier, that as human beings, we're not really great at uncertainty, and uncertainty can leave us maybe not cognitively functioning at our best right at the start when we confront this change and the uncertainty. I think what we all have to do is have a sense of hope. We have to intervene with ourselves, actually, and question some of the automatic kind of negative thinking that pops up when we think about, oh, I'm going to have to change, or my work environment's going to change. We're all born with a slight cognitive bias to the negative. And if we want to look at change with fresh eyes, be able to see the opportunity, we have to challenge that thought that change is bad. And that's the thing that normally pops up first. And try and look at that opportunity. To do that, we sometimes have to create a space. That might mean taking a long walk. It might mean doing some breathing or some of those kind of meditative stretching exercises. But whatever we need to do, we don't need to react automatically, because our normal automatic reaction to change is not good. So create that space and then let the thinking evolve is my thought.
That's really a great question. Alison, I think Susie's making some excellent points here that this negative reaction to this change can really sort of start to foster a sense of cynicism. And so we have to kind of correct ourselves and get back on track. What are your thoughts related to agility and adaptability?
Sure. So I work quite a bit in the technology sector, where agility is, a core attribute to the success of the research and development teams in the tech space. There's a concept of failing fast, right? So trying something, seeing if it works, and if it doesn't, moving on. That's kind of the agile leaps, the design thinking concepts that people tend to leverage in this space. I think being agile is helpful, using some of those concepts to create that adaptability, that flexibility, makes change less scary. If you try it and you get into that level of uncomfortableness that some people get to, and you're okay there, it kind of propels you into a next area or a new frontier, if you will, in not just your thinking, but the way you work too. And organizations celebrate that. They want to be agile and they want to be nimble. And that's all about the human capital, the talent, the employees in the businesses. So I think it's a good thing, agility. It's just, practicing agility is somewhat challenging.
Thank you, Alison. So I want to thank everyone for your questions, and I'm sorry we couldn't answer more. We have 30 minutes for this discussion, and it feels like it went lightning fast. I really want to thank you all for participating. And I'd also like to thank Alison and Susie for spending your time with us. I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone and really sharing our appreciation for your investment in our community, and really wish you well and appreciate your thoughts and perspectives. So I wanted to end with a final thought about how to potentially take what we've talked about. I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was thinking, I'm in the process personally of developing my own goals for next year, and I'm sure we've all been faced with that spot at the end of our goal setting process where we have to set some personal development goals. And most of us probably have different views on what those personal development goals might look like. But I wanted to offer something in the context of our discussion today that you might consider. Consider using the goal of cultivate resilience in your own personal development for the next year, and see if you can take some of the things we've talked about and directly apply them to the way that you work, the way that you engage with your team, the way that you lead. And I think you'll find that you'll have a rewarding experience. And hopefully next year you will have conquered that and can move on to the next challenges that will have less to do with resilience and more to do with the future and growth. And I wish you all well. So thank you. Have a great day. On behalf of SPE and the SPE Live team, we would like to thank you for joining us today. I'd encourage everyone to keep up to date. We have a number of these things. This is the second in a three-part series. So please join us in the future. Thank you.